Welcome to Neurodivergent Relationships with Dr. Kathy Marshak. The title of today's podcast is When Rule-Based Thinking Replaces Human Connection. This is a podcast about navigating the unique challenges of neurodivergent relationships. I'm Dr. Kathy Marshak. I'm a psychologist, author, and an expert in this area. Have you ever had a conversation with someone who just couldn't see beyond the rules, the logic, or the right way of doing things? No matter how much you tried to explain the human side of things, they just kept coming back to technical details and procedural correctness. If so, you've experienced what it's like to be in a neurodivergent relationship or in an HOA meeting. Today we're talking about what happens when rule-based thinking replaces human connection, whether in relationships, workplaces, or entire communities. We'll explore why some people, especially those on the autism spectrum, tend to focus on transactional problem solving rather than emotional engagement. And we'll look at how this same rigid, rule-driven thinking leads to dysfunction in institutions like HOA boards. So let's dive in. Why does this discussion matter? People often assume that when a leader or partner refuses to acknowledge emotions, they're being intentionally dismissive. But that's not always the case. In many cases, rigid, rule-driven minds simply don't process emotional information the way neurotypical people do. That's why in both neurodivergent relationships and bureaucratic institutions, we often see the same three major patterns of dysfunction. Bear with me while I turn the pages. Number one, rigid rule enforcement over common sense. Number two, transactional thinking over emotional connection. And number three, mislabeling assertiveness as aggression. These patterns create serious misunderstandings in relationships, workplaces, and governance. Let's break them down. Pattern number one, rigid rule enforcement versus common sense. So, many neurodiverse individuals view the world in black and white terms. They follow rules literally because it gives them structure and predictability. This can be helpful in certain fields like engineering, software development, or law, but it becomes a problem when rules replace common sense and human connection. This is exactly what happens in some neurodivergent relationships and in some leadership positions. For example, in my community, our HOA board president is a software engineer who designs AI systems for a living. And he runs the HOA board the same way he writes code, purely transactionally. Here's how it plays out. Instead of engaging in real conversations with homeowners, the board and the board president only communicates through unsigned, anonymous emails. They refuse to take responsibility for past damage because they didn't know about it before. They require homeowners to file formal complaints just to be heard and ignore submissions that don't cite a specific rule violation. If somebody just wants to bring up an idea, they're not allowed. It has to be a complaint. This isn't just bad judgment. This is rule-based transactional thinking at its worst. And in relationships, this same pattern leads to emotional disconnects between neurodiverse and neurotypical partners. A neurodiverse spouse might say, "I didn't realize you were upset, so why are you bringing it up now? If you wanted me to do something differently, you should have told me at the time. I followed the plan exactly. What's the problem?" To a neurotypical partner, these responses feel dismissive. To a neurodiverse partner, these responses feel logical and fair. And this is where empathy dysfunction, or EMD, comes into play. Pattern number two, transactional thinking versus emotional connection, or interactional connection. This is where the real disconnect happens. People with empathy dysfunction, or EMD, often struggle to, number one, recognize emotional cues in real time. Number two, express their own emotions in a way that connects. And number three, understand why people need emotional validation, not just solutions. This is why some neurodiverse individuals or autistic individuals and some rigid rules-based leaders struggle to engage in meaningful emotional conversations. This happened in my HOA when the board finally acknowledged that the board president finally acknowledged that runoff from his property had caused damage to mine. Did he take responsibility? No. The HO president took an AI-driven approach. He agreed to fix the problem moving forward, but refused to compensate me for the damage already done. He claimed that because he was unaware of the issue for years, he had no responsibility for past harm. He treated the situation as a technical repair, not a human issue that affected my home, my finances, and even my dog's health. His wife, Vicky, an IT manager for a government agency, took a similar approach. She said, "I just found out about this problem 3 months ago and I need time to process it," as if I hadn't been processing all along and paying for the damages. "I don't see why I have to pay for something that happened a long time ago. Can't we just move forward?" Like, it doesn't matter that you created the harm in the first place. Just because you just discovered it doesn't mean you didn't do it. To them, only newly discovered problems are real problems. But to those of us living with the consequences, that logic is deeply frustrating. This is empathy dysfunction at work. This isn't about malice or indifference. It's about how some minds process responsibility. Think about that. Many neurotypicals will say to me, "How come my neurodiverse partner won't accept responsibility for their actions?" Well, this is why. It's empathy dysfunction. Pattern number 3, mislabeling assertiveness as aggression. When neurotypical partners, or frustrated homeowners for that matter, push back against rigid rule-based decisions, they're often misinterpreted as being hostile, aggressive, or unreasonable. Here's the HOA example. Homeowners who demand transparency from the board are labeled difficult or troublemakers. Neurodivergent relationship is an example here. A neurotypical partner tries to have an emotional conversation, but their intensity is perceived as an attack. Why does this happen? Because rigid thinkers struggle to process emotional nuance. To them, all heightened emotions, frustration, urgency, sadness, feel like criticism or hostility. This is why real conversations never happen, or rarely happen, in these systems. And this is why we need to shift from transactional management to interactional leadership. If someone only acknowledges problems once they become aware of them, but refuses to take responsibility for the emotional or financial harm caused before, how does that affect trust? If they get caught and they finally acknowledge that, oh yeah, something happened, but they don't really want to do anything about it, does that affect trust in the relationship? And if empathy isn't naturally there, how do we bridge that gap? These are questions that I hope you bring to the after party. Thanks for joining me today on Neurodivergent Relationships. If the conversation resonated with you, I invite you to continue the discussion in the podcast after party, a live confidential space where we take these topics deeper. All you have to do is visit one of my websites posted right here on the podcast and look at the schedule for the after party. It's private, it's just for members, but I hope to see you there. Again, share this episode with anybody else who might be interested in this topic. You don't have to be a member to listen to the podcast, but you might want to join our group, our private small groups, to talk more about this, whether you're neurodiverse or neurotypical, or you're in a neurodivergent relationship and both of you want to join. Just look at the membership sites and join the group that's appropriate for you. And I hope that you stay strong, stay aware, and most of all, keep going. You can do this.